What's wrong? What's going on? I was gripped with a cold and certain dread the moment I returned to my chambers, and I couldn't keep the worry from sounding in my voice. My ladies-in-waiting tried to mask their expressions, but I had overheard them gossiping nervously amongst themselves from the corridor, and I knew that something was terribly wrong. The ladies glanced amongst themselves, too nervous to speak to me and deliver whatever horrible news they kept. Mercifully, Countess Eliza stepped forward, and with the slightest of curtsies, she began to explain. The king went hunting, my lady. Before she finished, I felt my veins turn to ice as my mind filled the rest of the story with the worst possible outcomes. What happened? Did he fall? Was there an accident with the weapon? Did the prey attack him? Is Aldrich all right? The king is unharmed, your highness. Another one of the ladies, Laura, replied hurriedly, eager to relieve me of my fears. With relief coursing through me, I slumped down onto the nearest settee and muttered a silent prayer. Pressing my hand against the gem-encrusted corset to slow my pounding heart, I tried to take a deep breath, but I realized that the tension in the room was just as thick as before. Something was still wrong. I searched the faces of my ladies, seeking the truth. But if the king is not hurt, why are you upset? Why are you all looking at me like that? King Aldrich brought something back to the palace. Something from the woods. Countess Eliza explained, her face flushing red. A woman, although certainly not a lady, if you understand me, your highness. I felt my own cheeks beginning to colour with heat. He brought back a woman. My voice trembled over the last word, and I was furious at myself for revealing such weakness. Although Aldrich and I were both permitted to take lovers under the contract of our royal marriage, he had never before done anything of the sort. We had never even spoken of such a thing. Our love, our passion, had always been more than enough to satisfy us. More than that, we had always respected each other far too much to do something like this. Your Highness, that's not the worst of it. Countess Eliza began again, her own voice trembling with uncertainty. When the king returned, he carried the woman, limp in his arms, back to the palace, and he ordered us to wash the dirty creature. We were of course appalled, your highness, but we couldn't deny the king his wishes. I felt my frown deepen into a scowl. This was unusual indeed. All of my ladies-in-waiting were the wives of high-ranking noble families, and it was at the core of their vows of loyalty to only attend to me. For Aldrich to demand that they break such a sacred promise, not only break, but to wash the filth from a tramp he found in the woods. Furious, I pushed myself up from the seat and moved to the great leaded glass window so that my ladies couldn't see the emotion in my face. And who is this woman? I asked, keeping my tone even, careful not to betray my unease. We're not entirely sure. Another lady-in-waiting began. Her leg had been trapped. Her leg! I hated the feeling that I was struggling to keep up, but something wasn't quite falling into place. Yes, her leg was caught in one of the gamekeeper's traps. The king found her and tried to save her. I let out a long exhale. So that explains it. My husband simply felt sorry for the poor thing and felt responsible, as it was one of the traps on the palace grounds. His actions reflected nothing but kindness and remorse for the wayward and injured woman. This wasn't infidelity. It was honor. The exact behavior expected of a king of a great and powerful realm. That sounded like the Aldrich I knew and loved. I turned back to my ladies, a smile on my face. That sounds perfectly acceptable. I thank you, ladies, as always, for the information and for your concern over my feelings. I have no further worries, and I would like to put this behind us. Countess Eliza, will you draw me a bath? My lady, Eliza began tentatively. She was still wringing her hands. Yes, what is it? There is one more thing you should know. I raised an eyebrow. And what is that? She wasn't just any woman, your highness. She was quite beautiful. At first, she was so filthy that I thought I was imagining it. However, after we had cleansed her wounds and removed the filth, she was really quite stunning, Your Majesty. This new development sent a cold shudder through my body, and my mind whirling back to the dark place it had just emerged from. How stunning. She looked a bit like the Duchess of Betha, I might say, or rather the way the Duchess looked in her youth. The Duchess of Betha. The woman whose beauty has started wars? The most beautiful woman in all the realms. You can't be serious. Of course, there is no comparison to your beauty, Your Majesty. Another lady-in-waiting, Penelope, squeaked from the back of the group, as though that would calm my dismay. My own physical beauty was, admittedly, a point that was difficult for me to glean. With my silky dark hair and lively green eyes, I believed I was relatively attractive when I looked in a mirror, at least by my own estimation. But I'd been groomed to be a queen since I was a child, and therefore everyone had tended to flatter me from an early age. Therefore, it was difficult for me to know just where I fell in terms of my physical appeal. Though Aldrich had certainly made me feel desired, I blushed even at the thought of some of our more erotic encounters. However, the Duchess of Betha was incomparable, and if this new woman was anything like her, no man would be able to resist her. To my dismay, it appeared that my ladies-in-waiting were not finished with their report. Do you have more to say? I asked them, trying my hardest to keep my voice neutral. Please go on. If it's punishment or fury you are afraid of, you needn't worry. You're safe with me. Lady Penelope took a breath and then continued. Truthfully, my lady, the king seemed quite taken by her. But as soon as the words left her mouth and she saw the effect they had on me, her face whitened. I tried my best to keep my composure. How could you tell that the king was fond of her? I assume he was not present for her bath. Of course not, my lady, but he came to see her afterwards, after she'd been dressed. But he pushed the bounds of common decency, touching her wounded leg, tending to her. He seemed highly concerned. I too now felt highly concerned. But still, I knew I would rapidly lose power and authority if I allowed my unease to show. Aldrich is allowed to take concubines, after all. This doesn't have to change anything between us. Who am I kidding? This changes everything between us. My heart felt as though it was shattering. But that's the curse about being a queen. You can never let your emotions show. Dashing the tears from my eyes with the back of my hand, I turned to my ladies-in-waiting and spoke firmly and confidently. My husband is a kind man. He has done what any great king would do. Not only do I respect his decision, but I am proud of him. And if he feels the need to take this woman as some sort of trophy, then he is fully within his rights. I hoped that aligning myself with Aldrich, even if just in the face of my ladies-in-waiting, they did gossip after all, would put the issue to rest. I couldn't think of him making love to another woman. His hands belonged on me. His lips belonged on mine. I couldn't bear the thought. And in a way, it didn't matter. The most important thing was to present a united front with my husband the king, to protect our political standing and our realm. But my confidence didn't last beyond the sunrise. When I emerged from my bedchamber for breakfast the next morning, I heard my ladies still chattering amongst themselves in hushed and whispered tones. I heard the filthy trump is a runaway slave. She got into the hunting ground while she was fleeing her masters. If she really is a slave, she should be sent back immediately. How embarrassing for the palace that the king has taken her in. I heard he tended to her wound personally. Can you imagine? The king, alone with a woman like that, tending to her bare flesh. My heart sank. This was no idle gossip. I was well aware of the whispers of the palace intrigue, and knew how to navigate it, but this was something different. In my heart, I knew that this was the truth. Smoothing my silk skirts and straightening my back, I did my best to gracefully interrupt the discussion with an easy smile. My husband always has a heart of gold, I assured my ladies-in-waiting. I appreciate your concern, but I promise you have nothing to worry about. That evening, the ladies dressed me more methodically than usual, taking care to arrange my dark curls just so as to select my most flattering gown, a dark navy blue velvet, and to adorn me in glittering jewels made of the most precious silver, pearls, and diamonds. You look stunning, my lady, like the glittering night sky, Countess Eliza assured me, taking a step back to admire her work. Your dinner with the king will surely go well, and you're certain to win him back looking like this. I don't need to win my husband back, I snapped at Eliza before catching myself. He is my husband. He is already mine. Besides, the king and I are perfectly well, thank you. Of course, Countess Eliza quickly replied. I didn't mean to suggest anything else. I just think you're stunning and he is lucky to have you by his side. I smiled encouragingly at my ladies-in-waiting, but inside a storm was brewing. What on earth could Aldrich be thinking? Have I done something to displease him? Does he not find me attractive anymore? How could he do this to us? To the kingdom? I decided that enough was enough. I would have to confront him at dinner. I needed to know the truth. Aldrich's knife sliced across his porcelain plate as he cut into a steak, the noise sending shivers down my spine. Ordinarily, our dinners were lively, full of conversation and good cheer. In fact, it was one of the things I liked most about my marriage to Aldrich. We never ran out of topics to discuss. This evening, however, was an entirely different affair. Aldrich had remained uncharacteristically quiet during the meal, hardly speaking to me beyond polite niceties. Through my lashes, I studied him from across the grand oak table. The firelight caught the strong line of his jaw and danced across his broad back and shoulders. Usually, Aldrich wore a strong, proud expression, but tonight he brooded. How is the steak? I finally offered.
It's fine, thank you. And your salmon?
Quite delicious, thank you for asking. I smiled openly, trying to entice my husband to open up about whatever, or whoever, was on his mind. But he once again lapsed into silence. Tell me about your week, husband dearest. Has anything of note taken place? I kept my voice calm, even. I wanted to be careful not to betray what was on my mind. Not quite yet. Aldrich considered the question between bites of his meal.
Anything of note? No. For better or worse, the week has been fairly mundane.
With a stab of betrayal, I realized he was not about to open up to me regarding the woman he had found. And that struck far more fear into my heart than anything else. He was keeping secrets. If I wanted to discuss the matter, I would have to broach the conversation myself. I was hardly keen to dip my foot into these treacherous waters, but still something compelled me to push forward, despite my better judgment. Mundane? I heard you found a runaway slave in the hunting grounds. Is that true? Aldrich's knife fell onto his delicate china plate. Looking up, he offered me nothing other than a long, hard stare. In that moment, I knew it was true. My husband had taken a lover. My position as the queen, and the fate of our entire kingdom, was suddenly at risk.
Who told you that?
Aldrich's gaze was icy, and his voice dangerous. He made his demand from across the grand table, the one we had shared so many intimate dinners at, but the sudden tension in the air made me feel threatened. But I wasn't about to betray my ladies-in-waiting. Everyone is talking about this woman you brought back to the palace, from the footman to the gardeners. Evidently, you didn't bother to take much care in hiding the event, or your scandalous reaction to it. Aldrich wasn't listening. Instead, his face continued to darken.
It was Eliza, wasn't it? Or Laura. She's always been impertinent.
It doesn't matter who told me, Aldrich. I'm asking you if it's true. Instead of answering, the king glared at me. then placed another bite of steak into his mouth and chewed slowly, deliberately, the muscles of his jaw working forcefully. I realized that he was buying himself time. When Aldrich finally answered, his words were cool and carefully calibrated.
I'm not sure what you heard, but I hardly believe it's worth all this interest. I found a woman who was badly hurt, and I helped her,
he said, reaching for his goblet of crimson wine. On the surface, my husband's response seemed rational enough. Still, I couldn't help but notice that he had called her a woman, and that his cheeks pinked when he said the word. Was that guilt? Or desire? And where is she now? I couldn't help but ask. I knew I was pushing, but I had to know.
Bronwyn, we share meals with just the two of us so rarely. Surely we have other, more important matters to discuss. Wouldn't you agree?
The iciness in his voice made it clear that this was the end of this particular conversation, though I doubted he'd be eager to discuss anything further with me for the rest of the night. But even still, I continued to push. I couldn't seem to help myself. Aldrich, I did not suggest anything unusual. As the caretaker of the Imperial Palace, I'm only asking about the goings-on within these walls. But you are the one who's making me concerned. Is there something going on that I should know about? I kept my tone gentle, a smile on my lips. I still wanted to appear casual, unconcerned. Aldrich, however, shifted uneasily in his seat.
She got caught in one of the traps, Bronwyn. I felt bad about the situation, so I brought her here to be treated. I've had her put in a room with a maid to look after her and ensure a complete recovery.
I see. There was no denying it. Aldrich was being protective over this woman. After taking another drink of wine, he continued, his voice gruff.
I can assure you, she won't be a bother to you. I won't call on your ladies-in-waiting again. Now, I'd like to please change the subject, if you don't mind.
But I folded my arms across my chest and refused to agree. Aldrich noticed my tiny rebellion. Irritated, he returned to his steak, but after a few ineffectual slices with the knife, he dropped the utensils on the table with a... pushed himself out of his seat and stormed out of the room. So, what did His Majesty say? When I returned to the West Palace after dinner, I found my ladies anxiously waiting for me in my chambers. I wasn't obliged to tell them anything, but I was desperate for a confidant. To be honest, he didn't say much, but that was the problem. My ladies exchanged a series of meaningful glances with one another, each making their own assumptions, but each afraid to speak. As usual, it was Lady Eliza who came to my side. If you truly said nothing, Your Highness, then why are you so upset? I'm not upset, I said hastily. Too hastily. My ladies-in-waiting gave me a look that indicated they could read me better than that, and I had better tell them what was really going on. I sighed, exhausted by the entire unpleasant turn of events. I had to drag even the tiniest scraps of truth from him, and in the end Aldrich only told me what I already knew, that there was a woman who'd been caught in one of the gamekeeper's traps, and he felt bad and has decided to take care of her. Lady Laura looked at me sternly, aware that I was holding something back. And? What else? I let out a long sigh. There was one thing that left me uneasy. He failed to mention to me that she was a runaway slave, and when he called her a woman, My ladies-in-waiting exchanged another look, as if this seemed to prove something to them. One of the ladies, Viscountess Verdi, raised an arched eyebrow. What? What did he do, my lady? The look on his face. I know it well. He desires her. I knew I should stop talking, stop feeding the gossip mongers, but at the same time it felt good to speak freely, to confide in women who I knew were loyal to me. How did you leave it, Your Majesty? We solved nothing. He stormed out. Lady Laura stamped her delicate little foot in frustration. A few other more genteel ladies glanced at her judgmentally, but Laura was never one to behave as others wanted her to. Your Majesty, pardon me for saying so, but you can't allow that tramp to come between you and the king. How dare he treat you so? Laura! Lady Penelope scolded, but I noticed she did not deny or contradict Laura's words. I tried to remain calm and collected, but I must have winced outwardly, because Countess Eliza came up behind me and began to stroke my shoulders gently. Sensing my pain, she motioned for the other ladies to leave the room. As they scurried to the outer rooms of my chambers, Eliza began to brush my hair with a pearl-laden comb, something she knew always soothed me. I'm fine, Eliza, really. I tried to assure her, but my voice still trembled. My mother always told me that Aldrich might take another woman as his lover, and warned me not to let myself be hurt. The fate of the kingdom depends on it. After all, this is a common practice with kings, and it isn't really a surprise, given that ours was an arranged marriage. But we... Oh, Eliza, how could he do this to me? He may be allowed to take the slave girl in, but you're also allowed to be sad, my queen. I thought about her words for a moment, before realizing something. I'm not sad. I'm angry. Countess Eliza nodded as she gently folded my hair into a braid, though it was unclear if she believed me or not. No matter what, she offered, trying to reassure me. Even if this woman becomes his concubine, she can't enter high society, my lady. You're safe there. What do you mean? Runaway slaves are considered to be escaped prisoners, and therefore cannot rise within society's ranks, or even be seen amongst us. So put her out of your mind, your highness, because no matter how much the king lavishes the woman, and he'll soon tire of her, all men do, you'll never need to speak to her, see her, or even think about her. I did my best to smile at the countess. You're right. The woman doesn't matter at all. She's nothing. But nothing was creating an awful lot of turmoil in my once peaceful palace, as my husband began to spend more and more time with the slave girl whom he'd caught in his trap. The rumors swirled faster and faster around the estate, whispered behind rose bushes and floating along the elegant corridors.
Does the king really go to see the slave every day?
I heard it sometimes multiple times a day.
What does he do in there with her? What doesn't he do in there with her? She's a concubine after all.
I heard the king has his eye on her to produce his heir.
I heard he won't talk to the queen about the woman at all, that he barely looks at her anymore.
I heard the queen is heartbroken. She's been crying every night. The queen isn't crying, she's plotting. I heard that she's so jealous that she's planning on murdering the girl.
I have it on good authority that she's sent her most trusted ladies-in-waiting to forage for poisonous mushrooms to slip into the concubines' meals.
To address the rumors would be to give them air, so I simply tried to ignore them, to keep smiling, to do my part in running the empire. But eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I often ran to the most secluded part of the palace gardens so that I could cry until my heart broke. Every winter solstice, I gathered all of the most prominent lords and officials to the palace to discuss preparations for the upcoming year. This was a significant event, for which I always prepared greatly. But this year, I felt it was more important than ever to present an air of confidence and calm, given the swirl of rumors surrounding my personal life. I had dressed in my favorite green velvet gown, the one with a long row of tiny pearl buttons down the back, and I had my ladies coil my hair down my back in a thick, plaited braid. They had even woven flowers into the braid, a winter tradition that symbolizes new life and fresh beginnings. Considering Aldrich's recent behavior, I relished the thought of a fresh start. The morning had been filled with diplomatic meetings and a barrage of thinly veiled questions about my marriage. I needed a break, or else I thought I would scream. Tapping Sir Artemis, the deputy commander of the knights and my loyal bodyguard, on the shoulder. I whispered that I needed a moment in the gardens. He nodded his understanding, and out we went. The gardens were expansive, and admired throughout the realm well before I had married the king, but I had taken special care to nurture them even further. Now, even in winter, the verdant paths blossomed with exotic trees and rare flowers, such as snowdrops and winterberries, and had come to be known as the jewel of the imperial palace. Artemis, I began as we rounded the hedge of white roses. Which of your men do you recommend to supervise the winter solstice ball? But before the knight could respond, he froze. Artemis, what is it? He placed a silent finger to his lips, instructing me to be quiet. He had heard something. My heart turned to ice as I watched the knight's gloved hand move to the hilt of his sword. Could it be thieves? My mind raced. Assassins. Carefully guiding me behind him, Artemis placed himself between me and whatever danger lay beyond the thick hedges of roses. I could see nothing, and I strained to hear what had startled the warrior. What is it? I whispered, but before the knight could answer, I saw his cheeks pinking from embarrassment. Confused, I strained even further to listen. That was when the sounds came to me more clearly. A soft moan, whispered nothings, and heavy breathing. Now my cheeks pinked at the unmistakable sound of lovemaking. Though the threat to life and limb may have passed, Artemis was not best pleased to have my honor so sullied. He stepped forward, his voice booming in the frosty air.
Out of there this instant! These are the Queen's sacred gardens, and I'll not have you defiling them in her presence.
A muffled squeak and groan of frustration followed his orders, followed by a panicked rustling of clothes from behind the hedge.
Show yourselves!
One of them dashed off and away from us, but the other, the woman, stepped out to face us. As my steely green eyes connected with the woman's, which I noticed were the beautiful, deep blue of a glittering lake on a winter's day, I realized that this could be her. Then I saw the bandage on her leg. It was her. This was my husband's concubine. For a moment, I stood there, frozen to the spot as a cold dread washed over me. All of the rumors had been true. With her soft, heart-shaped face, light, wavy hair, and full, supple pink lips, my husband's concubine was without a doubt the most stunning woman I had ever laid eyes on. I knew then that she was going to bring ruin to my life and to my empire. It was her, my husband's concubine, the woman whom I was never supposed to meet or even see, but now she stood before me, her blonde hair tousled, the scandalous curves of her figure barely concealed beneath her gossamer dress, her skin glowing from making love. Wait. Had that been Aldrich with her just now? Had he run off, leaving her to fend for herself? Or had that been another man that this harlot had entrapped? I felt a hand fall on my shoulder and realized that it was Sir Artemis, mercifully trying to shake me from my trance.
My lady,
he began delicately.
Shall we?
He was right. I owed her nothing. All I had to do was walk away. But still my gaze remained fixed on the mesmerizing young woman, my rival, my enemy. The shameless thing took advantage of my disorientation. Taking a wavering step forward on her injured leg, the woman held out her hand to me. Pleased to meet you, miss. My name is Rose, she said, in a voice as soft as a lullaby.
Have you no manners?
Sir Artemis demanded of the girl, stepping between me and her, sparing me from having to answer.
Do you not recognize to whom you speak? She doesn't deserve a handshake. She deserves your fealty and respect.
Rose took a stuttering step backward, her delicate hand fluttering to her mouth in surprise. I'm so sorry, she began, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. I should have greeted you more properly. I just didn't know your name." Didn't know my name? Did this woman really have no idea who I was? I looked down at my dress and suddenly wished I had worn something more regal.
"This is Her Majesty, the Queen, you idiot child."
The old knight had never been one to mince words, and he apparently wasn't about to start now. I had always been grateful to him for his loyalty, but in that moment, my gratitude grew tenfold. Rose's eyes widened. At first, I believed she was deeply embarrassed, but then she opened and closed her perfect mouth a few times, like a fish struggling for air. She was confused. What? No. I know the Queen. She knows me. My mind had already been spinning at this unexpected encounter. Let me rephrase, at stumbling across my husband screwing another woman. But now I felt as though I was the one struggling to keep up. I looked over her once more, seeking clues as to her identity, but got nothing more than an eyeful of her womanly figure. Perfect pale breasts, a heart-shaped face. I have never seen her before in my life. And I would have remembered. Her beauty was so intoxicating, like an enchantment from an ethereal world, that it would remain with whoever looked upon her for long after. "But, Your Majesty," she continued, taking another tentative step forward. "I'm Rose." I frowned at her and exchanged a confused glance with Sir Artemis. Who was Rose? And why did she continue sharing her name with me as if I ought to know what it meant? Maybe I did have it wrong. Maybe the poor woman was far from a concubine. Good God, what if she was a noble set upon by some philanderer in the gardens, and we were interrogating her? I racked my brain for every woman who had visited this country with foreign dignitaries. I was present to welcome many of our guests, but not all. Others were welcomed by ministers or Aldrich directly. Perhaps Rose had been one of those guests. But her wounded leg, and the aching in my heart, told me that wasn't the case. I levelled my gaze at her. "Do you know me, Rose?" I asked her coolly. But the beautiful woman just blinked back at me, surprised, still a little bit dazed from her dalliance in the hedgerow. "So you don't know me, then?" I pressed. Well, I am living in the Eastern Palace, by the kindness of His Majesty the King." I paled at her implication. We were sharing the same man. That had been Aldrich, and as his concubine, her twisted little mind believed that we shared some sort of connection. What did she expect us to be? Friends? It was time to put this woman in her place. "So, you're the slave." I kept my voice icy, intending for every syllable to pierce through Rose's calm exterior. "No, Your Majesty. I'm no such thing." "Am I simply meant to take you at your word?" "It's all I have, Your Majesty." I looked over my shoulder for Artemis's support, which he was more than willing to give, but mercifully, I saw the ladies Eliza and Laura rushing to our location. This situation required a woman's intuition. Their skirts hitched high about their ankles, their faces flushed, they ran to my side. They must have seen our standoff from across the gardens. "Your Majesty!" Lady Laura gasped. "What's going on? Who is this?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Rose spoke over me. "The Queen and I are just getting acquainted. I've been desperate to meet her. I'm Rose." As she spoke, extending her hand once again to my ladies-in-waiting, I could feel anger and confusion bubbling up within me. "You wanted to meet me? Why on earth would you want to do that?" "Oh, I did, desperately," Rose assured me. "I've asked the King several times, actually, but he kept telling me I shouldn't bother. He'd wave me off like he didn't think it was important. I still thought it would be proper, though. Because me. And of course I'd love nothing more than to meet a queen." As she prattled on, my mood darkened. Who was this girl? Was she putting on an act to seduce my husband and win public favour? A master manipulator? Or was she truly this innocent? this ill-prepared to understand the way the world worked. Her beauty certainly allowed her to get away with anything she wanted. Her large, dark eyes and golden hair gave her an innocent, yet otherworldly appearance. That was probably what had captured Aldrich. He had always been drawn to the exotic. I hated that I could see what he saw in her, or what he thought he did. However, I was also certain of something else. There was something she wasn't saying, some secret, and I vowed to discover what it was. Rose continued, filling the silence between us. What should I call you, Your Majesty? You may call me Your Majesty, I responded stiffly. That's all? Yes, that's all. You may call me Your Majesty or Your Highness, but nothing else. You are nothing more than a stranger to me, do you understand? I, however, am the queen of this realm and the caretaker of this palace, and you are to treat me as such. I may not be able to control my husband's urges, but I do not have to subject myself to your presence either. And certainly not mere moments after you were in my husband's arms. Oh. The girl's face fell. Feeling a dark satisfaction at seeing the disappointment in the girl's eyes, I spun on my heel to leave. However, Lady Laura wasn't quite finished. From the corner of my eye, I saw her take a step forward towards Rose. Your behaviour towards the Queen is impertinent and shameful, you common little wench, she seethed, looming over the girl. You're to stay away from her, do you hear? Do not seek her out, do not speak of her, do not even think of her. You stay away. Stay away? Once again, Rose appeared genuinely confused. You heard me. Laura's voice was a low hiss now. Who are you to act so friendly towards her? Just because you sold your body to the king? She owes you nothing. The Queen would never say it to you herself, but I will. You are nothing but a common, filthy whore.
What do you mean, whore?
A low, male voice growled behind me. Dread filled my stomach as I slowly turned round. I knew that voice better than anyone's, and even in anger, it sent a jolt of electricity through me. It was Aldrich. The king himself had returned. He stood tall and broad amongst the frosted rose garden, his face dark with rage. There was no telling how much of the conversation he had heard, but he had certainly witnessed the end of it. The anger coming off him was palpable, angry enough for him to come back to the scene from which he fled. He was normally an intimidating man, towering and broad, but when he was angry, his presence pushed the bounds of any space he stood within. He glared at Lady Laura, his eyes dark with smouldering fury. I'm so sorry, Your Majesty, Laura began, the colour draining from her face. I was just protecting Queen Bronwyn's honour. Lauren was not one to apologise easily, even when she had done wrong, but insulting the object of Aldrich's affection was an unparalleled offence. Laura and Countess Eliza quickly dipped into deep curtsies before the king. I, however, stood my ground. As if sensing my eyes on him, Aldrich turned to me.
And Bronwyn, I thought better of you than to involve yourself in such idle gossip.
Idle gossip? Is that what you're calling your seduction behind the hedge? I glared at him. The last thing I wanted was to apologise, as if I were afraid of him, as if I needed his approval. After all, he was the one who had taken a concubine. He should be getting down on his knees and apologising to me. The tension simmered between us, but our standoff was broken by the sound of soft whimpering. I looked up and saw that Rose's eyes were glimmering with tears. She was trying, but struggling to control her emotions. To my horror, Aldrich went right to her and took her hand.
Don't cry, sweet one,
he cooed. But despite his attempt to soothe her, tears began to stream down her face, staining her pink cheeks. I couldn't stand the sight of her small hand in his, the sight of their skin touching, the way her cheeks pinked under his gaze. Even worse, I hated the way he gently wiped her silent tears away, something he had never done for me with such care. I was appalled and hurt by the sight,
You're a handful.
My husband sighed, then gathered Rose into his arms. To anyone else, he might have sounded irritated, but I could hear the dull note of worry in his tone, and the corner of my heart throbbed. He cared about this woman. And as much as I hated to admit it, it was growing painful for me to watch. I wouldn't be able to prevent Aldrich from having a concubine, but that didn't mean I had to witness the two of them together. Clearly, you two need a moment alone, I hissed. Having had more than enough, I turned to address Artemis and my ladies-in-waiting. Shall we head back to the conference? Unlike some senior royals, I have duties to attend to. My entourage quickly followed after me as I began to walk away, but we didn't get far before Aldrich's voice rang through the garden.
Everyone stop.
I turned around, arching an eyebrow, assuming he meant to have further words with me. But instead, he raised a finger and pointed it at Lady Laura, fixing her with a stern glare.
Leave this lady behind.
I felt my cheeks flush with anger. And why would I do that? Aldrich clenched his jaw.
I said, leave her.
What do you mean, leave her? She's my lady-in-waiting, and I will do no such thing until I know your purpose. I stood against the king, the tension between us simmering in the icy rose garden. Next to me, Laura's complexion had turned pale. I reached out to grasp her hand in support, and I noticed that Countess Eliza held her up by her opposite elbow, so that the poor woman wouldn't collapse under my husband's veiled threat. Just what do you plan on doing with her? I pressed.
That woman and her foul mouth deserve to be punished.
Aldrich, you know as well as I do that would publicly disgrace her and me in society. And for what? Speaking the truth. That new woman of yours is a whore. Aldrich's face purpled with anger, and he took a threatening step towards me, but he got no further. Sir Artemis placed himself squarely between me and the king.
Your Highness,
the old knight began, his voice battle-hardened.
I wouldn't advise any rash action. You'll do well to remember my oath to the Queen.
Aldrich stared down the knight, but even he knew better than to test Artemis's loyalty to me. Instead, he took a frustrated step backwards and ran a rough hand through his hair while he tried to subdue his anger. Meanwhile, my mind spun. All this is over her. This woman was neither noble nor even an official concubine. The only title she held was that of a runaway slave and the king's prostitute. But if Aldrich was this enraged over a simple insult, what lengths would he go to protect her from true threats? Would he ruin our marriage? Would he risk our entire empire? At that moment, my gaze met the king's, and I could suddenly see the darkness within his eyes. I had my answer. He would raise continence for this woman.
She may be your lady-in-waiting, Bronwyn,
Aldrich spat, raging against me once more.
but she is also my subject, and her behavior is inexcusable. How dare she speak to another person like that?
Then I will scold her. You can leave her punishment to me.
I am the king, and I decide punishments as I see fit!
Aldrich roared, his fury cresting. Artemis's hand went to the hilt of his sword once more, but the king directed his anger against a different target.
Lady Laura, I sentence you to the dungeon for 3 days, on meals of only hard bread and water.
Laura's face whitened, and Eliza let out a small gasp of distress. For my part, I felt as though I had been plunged into icy waters. The dungeons were for thieves and murderers, not outspoken ladies-in-waiting. Though my knees trembled, I stepped forward to challenge my husband. That is too far, Your Majesty. Aldrich and I were typically in lockstep in terms of our decisions, and I could hardly fathom that he would punish one of my ladies without consulting me first. Not to mention that the punishment was far too harsh. Unless Aldrich is deliberately trying to make a statement. The king glared at me, challenging me.
Are you questioning my judgment, Queen?
Of course I was. He wasn't thinking with his head. He was thinking with his cock. But I knew I had to tread lightly. I'm not questioning your judgment, Your Highness. I am simply suggesting that perhaps your decision could be more fully formed with my counsel.
5 days, then. I need no counsel.
I felt my heart sink. Searching Aldrich's face for any small sign of reason, I realized that I barely recognized the man whom I loved. The strong lines of his brow and jaw looked so familiar, and yet now so foreign, somehow darkened and bewitched. Behind him, Rose's eyes widened. I noticed with a dull stab of horror that she was staring at my husband as if he were some sort of hero, and then I understood. This entire show had been for her. I wanted to protest Aldrich's orders, to shake him and tell him that he was out of his mind, but the Queen did not have the power to overturn the King's commands. I could perhaps call a trial to challenge Laura's punishment, but by the time the trial opened she would already be released. Not to mention the chaos it would cause if the entire kingdom was aware that Aldrich and I were at odds. Beside me, Laura bowed her head and stepped forward before I could speak another word. I accept the punishment, Your Majesty. While I felt the bitterness of defeat, I saw in Aldrich's eyes the gleam of victory. So this is what we've become, opponents in a twisted game of hearts. Crushed, I gritted my teeth and turned away. The Imperial Palace was soon buzzing with the news of Lady Laura's shocking imprisonment. Worse yet, the gossip implied that Aldrich's decision to punish my lady-in-waiting in such a manner had represented an outright expression of his love for Rose. It had been the woman's first unofficial competition with me, and she had won. Even within my own small court, my ladies-in-waiting had begun to quietly express their concerns about the future. Mostly, they spoke softly to each other, trading worried glances and tidbits of information, rather than speaking directly to me. But of course, I was listening. It's only been a few days since the king met her. How far will this progress? I heard Countess Eliza murmuring to Penelope when they both thought I was out of earshot. The question occupied my every waking hour, which was torture enough, but even worse was that it was being more widely debated within the palace. I had to put a stop to this before the rumors spread beyond the palace walls. I had to confront Aldrich. And if he wasn't thinking with his head, perhaps there was another way to convince him to come back to my side. The king's schedule was no longer what it usually was. I could only blame Rose for the change, so it took some time before I could find a moment to have Aldrich to myself. In the back corner of the dimly lit library, I found him lounging in a deep leather armchair, book in hand, reading by the light of the leaded glass window. "Hello, Aldrich," I whispered, my voice hushed and soft. Slowly, he raised his head and met my gaze. His intense stare sent a fizz of excitement through my body. I didn't bother to try and hide it. I wanted him to see. The last thing I wanted was to fall into the role of the embittered, out-of-favor wife. I had heard tales of many noble women who had grown resentful in this sort of situation, and it ultimately served only to distance themselves from their husbands, pushing them further out of favor. I still hoped that if I could play this all correctly, Aldrich and I could weather the storm until he grew bored of this new plaything. Finally, he spoke.
Hello, Bronwyn.
I felt his eyes dancing across my body. Usually, this was a sign that he was ready to bed me, but today Aldrich seemed to be questioning my purpose, trying to determine my true motive. So you're still angry with me, then? Good, because I'm furious at you.
What do you want, Bronwyn? I'm in no mood to argue.
Then, what are you in the mood for? Curiosity furrowed his brow, and I took my chance. Gently, I removed the book from his hand, and hitched my skirt so as to lower myself on his lap in the chair. His face may have expressed doubt, but the hardening in his groin did not. Aldrich, I whispered as my desire rose with his. Take me like you always do. Without waiting for him to answer, "I'm not giving you the chance to deny me," I pressed my mouth upon his, inhaling the erotic scent of his skin, feeling the warmth of his tongue. At first he resisted, but then I felt, as much as heard, his groan of desire. I kissed him harder, and reached down to hitch my skirts the rest of the way, to undo the ties upon his breeks so that we could join. But suddenly, he pushed me slightly away from him.
Bronwyn, what are you doing?
"I am your wife. I want you. Is that too much to ask?" I reached down between his legs, intent on our union, but then he pushed me from his lap entirely. I struggled to find my footing as he, too, rose from the chair, a look of anger upon his face.
Don't. I know this play, and I will not be disloyal.
With that, he stormed from the library. I felt as if I had been kicked in the stomach. In the past, it had always been a thrill for us to run into each other in the palace. We had enjoyed many steamy rendezvous together. But this new coldness was a side to Aldrich I had never seen. He was worried about loyalty. To her. When 5 days had passed and Laura's imprisonment was finally over, I went up to the tower to retrieve her myself. Wanting to atone for the wrongdoing that had been committed against her, I asked the other ladies in waiting to tend to Laura in my own private bathroom, to bathe her, cleanse her, dress her, and bring her some dinner. I also ordered Laura's favourite sweet, an elderberry cake with heaps of fluffy lavender frosting. Satisfied that the poor woman was being cared for after her ordeal, I waited in my antechamber to see her when a secretary emerged and quietly pulled me into the corridor.
His Majesty the King requests your presence, Lady Bronwyn.
Now? Why?
He did not say, Your Highness, only that it was urgent.
I set my jaw and sighed. This wasn't going to be good. But as I made my way towards Aldrich's chambers, I wondered if this was, perhaps, him finally reaching out to offer an apology. Now that Lady Laura had been released from her sentence, maybe we could all put this unpleasant chapter behind us, and things could return to normal. When I found Aldrich, he was sitting at a small, round table in the lounge room of his own apartments. He saw me approaching and raised his eyes to meet mine, seemingly full of things to say. But I noticed, to my dismay, that his gaze was not filled with the warmth I had hoped for. "You summoned me?" I kept my voice neutral, waiting for Aldrich to establish the tone of the conversation, as I was still more than displeased with our last encounter. He pressed his lips together, seeming to hesitate for a moment. Then, finally, he began.
Your lady-in-waiting, the one who was present at...
"The daughter of Marquis Territal?"
Yes, Laura. I heard you escorted her back from prison today.
I frowned. Why is he making an issue of this? "That's correct. She is my lady-in-waiting, and she suffered unfairly for 5 days. Aldrich grimaced.
Did you have to?
"Did I have to do what?" I asked, unable to keep the note of acid from dripping into my tone. "Are you asking me if I had to care for a woman who was in trouble? Like you did?" I knew I was playing with fire by pointing out this double standard, but it had always been difficult for me to bite my tongue.
Bronwyn, you know what I'm trying to say. You retrieved the lady-in-waiting yourself, even though you were aware the gesture would offend me. Correct?
I suspected you might be displeased.
Yet you decided to take care of her anyway?
If you had any thought for me, you would have sent her away to the countryside or further. What power does the king have if the queen cares for the people he punishes?
A power that is kept in check, and not wielded depending on who he lusts after next. Aldrich pushed himself from the table in one swift movement, causing me to flinch. I tried to hold my ground, but I felt my knees tremble in the face of his sudden anger. But he moved no closer to me, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't a shout, but a hiss.
So, you will keep the lady in your court?
It's entirely up to me to decide who my ladies-in-waiting will be. And yes, Laura stays. Aldrich simmered.
I am tired of arguing with you, Bronwyn. Why can't you just be obedient to me for once?
The Queen does not have to bend the King's will.
That may be true, but if you continue on like this, you won't be able to compare.
I could sense the subtle threat in his voice. It made the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Compare? With whom?
The concubine. The argument with Bronwyn had left Aldrich feeling drained. Had she always been so spirited? With a heavy sigh, he reached for a small silver bell on the table, ringing it sharply. As expected, the door to his chambers opened, but it wasn't a servant who walked into the room. A high, tinkling voice giggled.
Hard at work? Or just hard?
Surprised, Aldrich glanced up to find Rose leaning in the doorway. Taking full advantage of the afternoon's golden light, she positioned herself just so that Aldrich could see her curves silhouetted beneath her thin gown. A broad smile broke across the king's face. Come here, my prey. On her tiptoes, Rose rushed into the room and flung herself on Aldrich's lap, nestling into his chest. Running his hand through her moonbeam hair, the king couldn't help but marvel at her. What a treasure she is, free of the shackles of aristocratic snobbery, so carefree, so unrestrained. For Aldrich, there had only been two significant women in his life, his mother and Bronwyn, both of whom he valued in different ways. But Rose, for Rose, he would destroy entire kingdoms just to feel her touch. Struggling to keep himself from going any further with her, Aldrich pulled himself back to the present. Are you hungry? When she nodded, he rang the bell once more, and the usual servant entered the chamber. Honey cakes. 2. No, 3. And bring wine. A light one. Aldrich could feel Rose tensing in his lap, and the moment the servant departed to fulfill the order, she turned to him and clapped her hands in excitement.
Honey cakes?
Yes. Why? Have you never had them before? Rose's face fell.
You know I've never had the chance to taste such a delicacy.
Oh, of course, my darling. I'm sorry. I forgot myself.
And you won't ever tell anyone? You won't reveal my secret?
On my life, your secret is safe with me. Aldrich wrapped his strong arms around her, holding her tighter, keeping her close and protected. You really are a marvel, Rose. The Queen doesn't even respond to the grandest jewels, but yet here you are, happy with honey cakes.
Doesn't she like jewelry?
I suppose she does, but the Queen rarely shows her true self. She's good at keeping her emotions hidden. She can be so icy. Rose frowned, sad to see the hurt on the king's face, even if the conversation had turned to her.
You cannot fault her, your highness. She grew up surrounded by wealth, and has no notion of the harsh world. Anyone like that would take jewelry for granted.
Aldrich leaned back, taking in the full sight of the woman before him. Well, look at that. My prey is more clever than I thought. Rose blushed and buried her face in his chest once more.
You always call me prey.
Because you're the prey that I caught in my trap.
I would rather you call me your concubine.
Aldrich gently held her chin between his fingers, raising her face to look into his. And so you shall be.
It was an ordinary day for such extraordinary news. The king was going to take the woman as his official concubine. I stared at myself sullenly in the mirror, while my ladies-in-waiting chattered darkly behind me. I'd been prepared for Aldrich to make such a move, but I didn't realize it would happen so soon. What if he plans the official ceremony just before the winter solstice celebrations? I muttered. That hideous possibility silenced the babble in the room. I felt nauseous at the thought of having to face the guests, knowing that they would have heard of the king's scandalous behavior. I couldn't stand the thought of the gossip, sure to take place behind gloved hands and fluttering fans. But I couldn't do anything about it. I turned from the mirror to question my ladies. Do any of you know anything about the king's plans? The ladies in waiting glanced at each other, but none had the courage to speak up. Eventually, Countess Eliza stepped forward. Your suspicions are correct, Your Majesty. Rumor has it that he wants the official investiture ceremony of the concubine to take place as soon as possible, before the winter solstice. I believe so, my lady, yes. His eagerness wounded me. It was as though he couldn't wait to push me out. I wouldn't shed a tear, not in front of my ladies in waiting, nor anyone else. But it took all my strength not to. The efforts to keep my emotions in check continued in front of Aldrich's secretary. He had intruded on my noontime meal to deliver his message, and didn't even have the decency enough to lower his voice in front of the attending footman.
The king wants it to be simple, as there are other large events scheduled around the solstice and time is tight.
I could feel the footman leaning in to catch snippets of gossip. My mind whirled. The king's concubines were not recognized as part of the royal family, nor would her children be recognized as princes or princesses. However, it was customary to hold a banquet. There were no secrets in my realm. Everyone knew of the king's concubines, both historical and present, and some even celebrated them. Usually the ceremony was nothing particularly extravagant, just a moment in time when the concubine would be the center of attention, and later to sign a contract notarized by the Chancellor. But the timing, with the winter solstice so close. Ordering my thoughts, I lowered my voice and turned back to the secretary. Is the king planning to hold a simple banquet or omit it altogether?
It's impossible to invite a large number of guests on such short notice, so the king is proposing to skip the banquet, Your Highness.
Then why come to me with this news? I have nothing to do with the signing of such a contract. Did the king send you out of consideration for me, or to bolster his own pride? This time, I was the one who didn't bother to lower my voice. I'd be happy for the footman to spread rumors of my displeasure. Even the secretary's cheeks pinked.
I will tell him you received the message, my lady.
He stuttered, then folded into a deep bow and left.
A cascade of magisterial documents covered every surface of Rosa's blush-coloured boudoir. She sat across from Baron Lant, quill in hand, and let out a small wail. The Baron couldn't understand what happened. He had been educating Rose, as he had been instructed to do, and had just finished explaining the basic outline of the documents when her eyes had widened and she broke down into tears.
But, my dear, there's no need to cry. It's all very simple. The king will sign the contract first, and then you will sign on the thin black line below his name.
There is every reason to cry, for I cannot sign.
Why ever not? Do you no longer wish to be his concubine?
Rose well and truly began to sob, her cheeks flaming with embarrassment.
Of course not. It's just... I have no signature. I cannot read. I cannot write.
Oh. When Baron Lant was assigned to Rose, the king had told him that she was a commoner, and so he had assumed that she had a basic education. Baron Lant began to wonder. Perhaps the rumors were true. Perhaps this beautiful prey the king favored so highly was indeed a runaway slave. There wasn't much worth in teaching slaves how to read or write. However, none of that changed the Baron's current task. He tried for a kind smile.
Do not worry, my dear. You don't need to explain anything to me. I won't be able to teach you to read or write in the few days between now and the ceremony, but I can certainly teach you how to sign your name."
He set a sheet of blank parchment in front of her, trying to rid his mind of the idea that Rose could possibly be a runaway slave.
"I'll write down several signatures that spell Rose, and you can choose your favorite. Then we'll practice together."
Rose was a quick learner, and over the course of an hour she had nearly mastered a feminine and sweeping signature. As she continued to practice, Baron Lant explained the remaining elements of the signing ceremony.
"And when do I get my gifts?"
Gifts?
"Well, I heard that the Queen sends gifts to the concubine once the contract is signed."
Miss Rose, I don't know where you heard that, but
Rose was certain in her knowledge.
"Cheryl and Kaya told me that it was in the Queen's best interest to give me gifts, in order to show me her respect and acknowledgement. We will be living together in the same palace, and sharing the same man after all."
Rose didn't seem to notice the sudden change that came over the Baron. She took his silence as confirmation of her expectations, when in reality, Baron Lant was quieted by the heavy feeling of dread.
"I'm not sending one," I told Aldrich's secretary. "There will be no gifts for the concubine, and that's final." The ladies heaved a collective sigh of relief at my answer, and hurriedly escorted the man from the room. There were many reasons not to send one. I had researched any precedents just to be sure, and even if there was a banquet, I was under no obligation to give the concubine a gift. The histories became a little murky, however, when it came to multiple concubines. Then I could wield or withhold gifts from one over the other, thereby preventing them, or even encouraging them, to build power or influence. Thank heaven we were a far cry from that possibility. I rubbed the back of my neck and tried to push the thought from my mind. It was difficult enough to manage one concubine, never mind an entire harem. Once the door was safely shut and the secretary was out of the room, the ladies descended upon me. "Well done, Your Majesty. Can you imagine what that little tart would do with any encouragement from you?" "Laura would have been so happy to hear you say what you just did," Countess Eliza said. "I was thinking of going to visit her today. I'll tell her of your decision, Your Majesty." "How is Laura?" "Still fuming over Miss Rose." "Tell her I thank her for her loyalty, and I look forward to her return. Now, if you will leave me, I feel I need some rest." "Of course, Your Majesty. But before you do, might we ask you something?" The other ladies in waiting fixed their eyes upon me. "Yes? What is it?" "Rumor has it that the Prince of the Celestial Isles is coming for the winter solstice celebrations. Is that true?" The ladies waited anxiously for my answer, and when I nodded, they squealed, covering their faces and fanning themselves. I strained my lips to keep myself from smiling at their reaction. They had every reason to look forward to his appearance. The Prince of the West was the lone, younger brother of the king of that realm, and he was renowned across all the lands. The ladies burst into excited chatter. "I hear he is the most handsome man on the continent." "They say not to look him in the eye, lest you be cast under his spell." "But I hear he's stubborn. It's no wonder the King of the Celestial Isles has given up on trying to find a match for him." "He's a womanizer. We should all keep our distance unless we want to land in trouble." "Will he be the heir to the West, since the king has no children?" "I don't know, but it makes you think there's something wrong with the king, and maybe something wrong with the prince too, since he's been with so many women and, you know." I nodded discreetly as I listened to the whispers of my ladies in waiting. The Celestial Isles was a country of great military power, virtually equal to that of my own empire. However, in terms of wealth, it was the richest in the world. Where there is wealth, there are rumors, and I had heard my fair share, not the least of which revolved around Prince Henry, his beauty and his allure. It was strange, however, because even at the mere thought of this man, I felt that familiar fizz of electricity coursing through my body, as though he was already here. as though he already held me in his arms. What do you mean there isn't going to be a banquet? There's always a banquet to honor a new concubine.
Rose stared at the king, wide-eyed, her glass of dark wine hovering just shy of her lips. Aldrich tried to keep his expression neutral. He didn't want her to see his displeasure at her reaction, but mostly he struggled to keep the image of Bronwyn in the library from flashing across his mind, worried that it would somehow show in his features. Aldrich dragged a heavy hand down his face, trying to clear his thoughts. "My prey, you must understand that nothing else can compete with the winter solstice celebrations. They are far too important. The feasting and socializing serve as the backdrop for some of the most important diplomacy that my kingdom sees in an entire year. I cannot schedule another banquet. There is simply no time, and it would not be proper. Not to place blame, darling, but you wanted this signing ceremony to occur as soon as possible." Rose was taken aback, and she wasn't disciplined enough to keep her true feelings from showing. Crestfallen, she replaced her silver goblet upon the mahogany table as her dreams of being welcomed by the nobility at a lavish banquet turned to dust. Suddenly, she worried that she would simply be the king's dirty little secret, instead of becoming the woman who would usurp a queen. She hung her head. With a sharp pang, Aldrich saw Rose's disappointment and moved to kneel before her, grasping her small hands in his. "Will you forgive me, my prey?" She shook her head, her mane of silvery hair falling across her face.
You're ashamed of me, aren't you?
"Why would you say that?"
Because you've done nothing but hide me away.
A single tear rolled down Rose's cheek. Aldrich lifted his hand to gently dab it away. "I thought you enjoyed our time alone. I thought you enjoyed everything that we do together when we are alone."
You know I do, but I can't live my life hidden away in the shadows.
"Rose, it's not that simple. I am the king. I have responsibilities."
So does the Queen. One very specific responsibility, in fact. But you tell me that in all this time, she hasn't borne you one child. I can do that for you.
"It doesn't work that way, Rose. Any children you bear for me will not be given status or titles. You are my concubine."
And you are my king. Make it work that way.
Rose's words, though whispered into the king's ear, were not a request. They were a command. And, as though to finalize that agreement, Rose lay back on the bed and spread her legs, knowing that Aldrich wouldn't be able to resist. She would get her way, one way or the other. Rose's disappointment only increased on the day of the ceremony, if it could be called a ceremony at all. In truth, the only witnesses to her diligently practiced signature were Aldrich and the Chancellor himself. Once Rose had signed, both men immediately departed, citing important work, leaving her alone, sad, and empty. There was no cheering or applause, no feeling of ecstasy, no satisfaction in knowing that she was now King Aldrich's first official concubine. To make things worse, even though Aldrich had told her there would be no grand banquet, Rose had been secretly certain that he had planned at least a modest one in her honor. But the feasting hour came and went. Rose then expected the king to shower her with gifts, apologies, and attention, but as the hour grew late, she was again forced to accept that that wasn't going to happen. Even her most basic wish for the day went unfulfilled. Queen Bronwyn herself failed to send any gifts, not even a word of congratulations. When Rose returned to her chambers, she buried her face in her hands and began to sob. Her maids, Cheryl and Kaya, Two women of low birth and questionable morals rushed to her side.
What is it, miss? What's happened? What hasn't happened? Nothing. Nothing has happened, other than I signed a silly piece of paper. No banquet, no gifts. And the Queen? The Queen! She couldn't even show her face to congratulate me. Never mind sending me the customary gifts. She knows the unspoken rules of this game. The king is allowed to take lovers, and she is supposed to acknowledge that. She doesn't have to like it, but she does have to play her part. If she becomes an obstacle to me, if she tries to interfere.
Cheryl and Kaya tutted and patted Rose's back, trying to comfort her, their feeble minds unable to grasp the intricacies of royal intrigue.
Don't cry, miss. It's still such a good day. You're an official concubine after all. The king welcomes you to his bed. What I wouldn't give to bed the king.
The two women giggled at the thought, and Rose's sobs quieted to sniffling. She was grateful for the friendship shown to her by Cheryl and Kaya, even if they were just maids. "Are you decent, my prey?" Aldrich's voice called from the other side of the heavy oak door.
Yes, my love. Come in.
At the sight of the king, Cheryl and Kaya scrambled to their feet, bobbing quick curtsies, and left the room. Rose noticed that they blushed in Aldrich's presence. "Why does my prey look so somber on this meaningful day?"
What do you mean meaningful? I haven't been congratulated by anyone.
"It was meaningful for me. And the Chancellor congratulated you. He bowed to you. And the servants did as well."
I don't want to be congratulated by the servants. I want to be congratulated by nobles. I want to be recognized by those who look down their noses at the rest of us. I want to be congratulated by the Queen herself.
Rose couldn't sit still any longer. She pushed herself up from the settee, brushed past Aldrich, and settled on the deep windowsill overlooking the palace grounds.
The Queen must wish me dead.
It would have been easy for Aldrich to let Rose go on believing that, but something in him couldn't abide the thought of ill will being directed towards Bronwyn. Aldrich rubbed the stiffness from his neck. This wasn't how he had expected the evening to go. "I have a confession. The Queen didn't prepare a banquet or a gift because she wants you dead. I told her not to, because it wasn't a good time."
As you say, my lord.
Her words may have indicated that she believed him, but her tone did not, and both Rose and Aldrich retreated to their separate bedrooms that night, very much alone. The next day, when the early morning mists still shrouded the kingdom, Aldrich instructed his secretary in hushed whispers to give Rose a luxurious gift. However, the tag didn't bear his name. Instead, the signature read, "From Bronwyn." "Your Majesty, the Grand Duke Lavilla has sent you a gift of silk from a foreign land."
I looked up from my morning chocolate to examine the item in the servant's outstretched hands. It was a gorgeous and rare blue silk that shone like the scales of a cutlass fish. Sighing, I put down my mug. The cloth was beautiful and very clearly expensive, but I couldn't accept it, knowing the intentions of the sender. Grand Duke Lavilla was Aldrich's uncle, and only 2 years older than his nephew, and although he had no desire to be the emperor, he regularly bribed me and asked me for favours, sometimes for power and influence, though usually in an attempt to bed me. It wasn't uncommon for the men of the aristocracy to purchase a night with a lady of status, though I wondered how many past queens had been bought. "Thank you, but tell the Grand Duke that I cannot accept it. I don't want any misunderstandings between us." This had happened many times before, and the servant smiled awkwardly. He had expected that answer, and knew exactly what it meant. He murmured a respectful, "Yes, Your Highness," and stepped back. From there, the morning descended into the usual rhythms of breakfast and gossip with my ladies-in-waiting, punctuated by a few visitors, mostly on palace business. But then the guard, my constant protector, Sir Artemis, announced the arrival of someone who I had not expected in the least. The old knight coughed before he spoke, the words sticking in his mouth.
Your ladyship, Miss Rose has requested an audience.
I looked back at the knight in surprise. Rose, here. He bowed his head and answered yes, with a look of undisguised contempt. Countess Eliza muttered something unflattering under her breath. Why does she dare to come here? I asked. Doesn't she know the rules of this twisted little game she's playing? Of course, Sir Artemis did not know. His job was merely to protect me. However, it was clear that he felt responsible in telling me the news, for he looked highly uncomfortable. Countess Eliza turned to me. Will you receive her, Your Highness? Frankly, I did not want to receive Rose at all. Not now, and likely not ever. Why should I be obligated to meet with someone who will only make me feel terrible? Maybe someday Aldrich and I will be able to laugh about all this, but that time was still far off, and it was difficult for me to even think about his lover, never mind admit her into my own chambers. But I had a sneaking suspicion that ignoring Rose entirely would only make things worse. For even if I was furious at the king, I did not want his own fury turned upon me, and shunning his lover would certainly assure that. I could tolerate just one visit. Let her in. Countess Eliza cried out in surprise. Your Majesty! I silenced her with a small gesture of my hand as Sir Artemis turned open the door. In a sweep of gossamer skirts and a mist of perfume, Rose entered the room, greeting me with a bright smile and a deep curtsy. Your Majesty! She genuflected before slowly rising to meet my gaze. I didn't know if she was pretending to neither know nor care about the incident with Laura, but Rose greeted me as though we were old friends. Countess Eliza did not bother to hide her displeasure at this familiarity and sat back in stony silence. I, however, schooled my expression into something as blank as possible. Fortunately, I had a great deal of practice in hiding my emotions in less than ideal situations. Congratulations on your new status as the king's concubine. Thank you, Your Majesty. It means such a great deal to hear you say those words. She may have been thanking me, but I watched as Rose's dark eyes danced over the splendor of my rooms, the tapestry, the velvet, the four-poster bed, but most especially, my closets bursting with jewels and dresses. Even my morning chocolate and pastries seemed of particular interest to her, and she couldn't help but lick her perfect pink lips when she glanced upon them. I suddenly regretted inviting her in. What brings you here? I asked, deciding to get straight to the point. Well, I thought you and I should get to know each other. And why is that? Well, she stuttered. Because you and I are like sisters now, Your Majesty. A family. Eliza nearly choked on her coffee. I was equally bewildered. Sisters. Family. Because we have the same husband. I was sure the rage showed on my face, for it was all I could do not to scream. How could she be so misinformed, so presumptuous? The concubine contract was just that, a contract. Literally a business deal with no mention of familial bonds. No concubine had been, or ever would be, recognized as part of the royal family. During her tenure, a concubine would receive a favorable amount of wealth and status, but if the contract was not extended, she had to leave the palace. No exceptions. She was expendable, a plaything at best. There were so many errors in her assumptions that I hardly knew where to begin in my response. As I tried to tame my thoughts, Rose gathered both of her hands together, clasping them in front of her chest. May I call you sister? She pleaded with her wide doe eyes. In that moment, I knew I would never be free of Rose. I'd never be rid of her while Aldrich favored her. She was now the bane of my life. Sisters. Sisters. A chill went down my spine as I considered Rose's request, and I found that I had reached the limit of my generosity. I leveled my emerald gaze at her and answered as firmly as I could. No. No. No, you may not call me your sister. Rose's expression fell, and her hands dropped back to her sides. She blinked at me, dumbfounded, clearly never having anticipated such an answer. You do hate me, then? She whispered, her chin trembling with the first sign of tears. Of course I hated her. It's not a matter of my feelings for you, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady, though my emotions boiled within. Listen carefully, Miss Rose. You may have become the king's concubine, but you are not my sister and never will be, nor will you ever be a part of this royal family. Now, I've had more than enough of this discussion. It's time for you to leave. I nodded at Sir Artemis, and he immediately escorted Rose out of the room. I could hear her pathetic sobs echoing down the hall as she retreated. The little she-devil accused me of being a mere concubine. A concubine? I'm her sister now. We serve the same man. How can she not see? Baron Land, tell me, why does the Queen shun me?
Rose lounged on the settee in her new and luxuriously appointed boudoir, alternately pouting and fuming. The Baron, now assigned to manage most of her affairs, had thought that today's visit would be rather perfunctory. After all, the contract signing ceremony was over. What more was there to do? But now the poor man stood with his arms folded over the leather portfolio he carried, taken aback and stuttering.
You visited the Queen?
Of course I did. Why would you ask such a question?
But you visited the Queen?
Yes. She sent me a gift. I thought I should go and thank her and introduce myself properly since our meeting in the garden was, well, rather unexpected, and I had been preoccupied just moments before.
Baron Lant pinched the bridge of his nose, trying not to groan. Rose tilted her little blonde head in confusion.
What is it? Did I do something wrong?
Worse than wrong.
At the change in the Baron's tone, Rose sat up, encouraging him to continue.
Miss Rose, your position is in exact opposition to the Queen's.
Why? We both serve the same husband.
Baron Lant couldn't believe the words coming out of Rose's mouth. He would have believed her insolent, even traitorous. However, her dark, wide eyes and open, doll-like expression convinced him that she acted out of a childish innocence. In fact, her looks would have convinced him of just about anything. Nonetheless, her ignorance was still something to be marveled at. She knew less about aristocratic society than even a child. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, the Baron stepped a little closer to Rose.
Miss Rose, did anyone advise you, for or against, when you mentioned your intended plan to visit the Queen?
Well, Cheryl and Kaya might have said something.
What did they say?
They thought it was a bad idea.
With that admission, Rose dropped her gaze to the ground, sniffling quietly. The Baron nearly reached for his handkerchief before remembering her lowly position, though when he spoke again, his tone was far softer than the one he had been previously using.
And who are they, this Cheryl and Kaya?
My maids. The king assigned them to me.
Maids? But those are just servant girls. They know nothing of the world. Miss Rose, do you not have any proper ladies-in-waiting?
Rose looked up into Baron Lant's eyes, a single crystalline tear dropping down her cheek. This time, the Baron did reach for his handkerchief, hurriedly handing it over to the poor girl in front of him.
No. Should I have?
Baron Lant grumbled indignantly.
Yes, Rose, you most certainly should. But don't you worry, my dear. Leave this with me. I'll see that you are properly cared for.
Baron Lant found the king in the armory, restringing his favourite bow. He had had to push through the horde of servants and secretaries who surrounded Aldrich, each eager to tend to their own responsibilities, but he now stood front and centre. However, the king's attention was still decidedly elsewhere, even though he addressed him directly.
But, Your Majesty, Miss Rose is ignorant of aristocratic society, and even as your concubine, this can't be abided. She must have training, education, someone to guide her.
She has maids for that.
Who are just as ignorant as she is. Sir, she must have at least one, preferably two ladies in waiting. You wouldn't want her behavior to embarrass you, sire, not with the upcoming winter solstice celebrations.
A murmur of whispers swept through the attending secretaries. Most were smart enough to keep quiet, but one was indignant enough to speak up.
What self-respecting noblewoman would want to serve a commoner like her?
The Baron was quick to snap back.
Miss Rose is not the first commoner to become a concubine.
That silenced the room. However, knowing he had let his emotions get the better of him, the Baron's cheeks pinked, then turned a flaming red when he realized that even the king had quit fiddling with the bowstring as a result of his outburst. Baron, you seem to favor the girl.
No, Your Majesty.
Are you certain? Does she not capture your attention? The Baron was aware of the danger lacing the king's voice.
Only insofar as it is proper, Your Majesty.
Good, because let everyone here note, Rose is mine. As if to underscore his point, in one swift motion, the king stood, strung his bow, and shot an arrow at a target on the far wall of the armory. A perfect strike. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Baron Lant returned to a safer topic.
Your Highness, she must learn.
Don't be ridiculous. I can teach her whatever she needs to know. It's not like she's becoming queen, for God's sake.
With all due respect, Your Majesty, Miss Rose knows so little, and the demands on your own time are so great. Please, Highness, for her sake and for yours, you must give her a lady-in-waiting to guide her in the ways of aristocratic society.
Instead of answering, Aldrich turned his attention to a nearby quiver, suddenly fascinated by the arrows held within. When he spoke again, his voice was muted, as if in confession. This was something that had already been on my mind. Baron Lant, make it so.
Your wish is my command, sire.
The atmosphere of rumour and gossip had been so thick in the castle that I couldn't wait to get out of doors. The gardens of the Western Palace were renowned across the realm, boasting divine flowers, priceless statues, and majestic trees soaring well into the sky. It was one of my favourite places to stroll and soothe my mind. My ladies-in-waiting trailed me by a respectful distance, allowing me the space and time to admire particularly colourful blooms or glittering pebbles for as long as I wanted. But there was something new in the garden today, something I had never seen there or anywhere else before. On a sturdy branch of juniper perched an exotic and handsome bird, hawk-like and of a decent size, preening its array of feathers. What a strange creature, I muttered to myself. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw that the ladies hadn't noticed it yet. They were too busy chattering about the futility of Aldrich's search for a lady-in-waiting for Rose. I was somehow glad that they were distracted, as it meant the mysterious creature could be mine and mine alone for a few moments longer. Careful not to make any sudden movements, I slowly approached the bird. It was an alert little thing, instantly aware of me, and yet it showed no fear. Emboldened by this, I reached out my hand, The bird cocked its head, but quickly hopped on, grasping my forearm so tightly that its talons pierced the fabric of my sleeve. I could feel the warm trickle of blood on my skin beneath, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't say why, but I found myself captivated. It wasn't long before my ladies noticed. What a pretty bird! Where did it come from? It's so fearless. Even as the ladies surrounded us, the bird didn't startle. I risked stroking the curve of its head, certain it was going to fly off, but to my delight, it didn't. So incredibly soft, its feathers were a sheen of black, but when the bird moved, catching the light of the sun, a blaze of colours gleamed from beneath, blues, golds, and greens, running down its neck and flaring onto its wings. That was when I noticed a small scroll of parchment tied to its leg with a silk ribbon. Gently, I tugged the knot loose and unfurled the paper. The ladies quieted at my discovery. It was a handwritten note.
The sight of you sets a fire in my soul. It pains and tortures me, yet I cannot resist it. I cannot resist you.
A nervous laugh escaped my lips, followed by a chorus of giggles from my ladies-in-waiting. Who do you suppose that was meant for? One of them asked. For the Queen, of course, scolded another. The bird found her, didn't it? That letter could be meant for anyone. The ladies' soft voices erupted into an argument about the note, but while I held the parchment in my hand, I blushed. I didn't know how, but I knew that it was indeed for me. But from who? Countess Eliza, noticing the blush on my cheeks, sidled up to me. Will you write back, Your Majesty? I hesitated for a moment, suddenly unsure about impropriety, but the fizz of electricity across my skin enticed me to engage in this little game. Do any of you carry a quill and parchment? Yes, Your Highness. I have some just here in my pocket. Taking up the implements from Viscountess Verdi, I settled myself on a nearby bench and tried to compose my reply. My ladies hovered around me, eager to see what I would write. One who plays with fire often gets burned. Satisfied with my response, and with the giggles it received from my ladies, I returned the quill, then took the bird to a nearby fountain, allowing it to drink while I tied my note onto its leg. Seeming to understand that its mission was complete, the bird nuzzled its beak against my hand before flying away. How curious, I mused, caressing the spot on my skin where the creature had touched me. We had spent a long and pleasurable afternoon walking in the gardens and chattering about the bird. However, when my ladies-in-waiting and I returned to my apartments, we found one of Aldrich's secretaries waiting for us. He looked displeased. Yes, what is it? I asked.
The king has requested your presence, Your Majesty.
All right. I will just change and then...
No, Your Majesty, you are already late.
With that one unfriendly statement, I felt all the happiness of my time with the handsome bird drain away. And judging by the expressions on my ladies' faces, they felt the same. This had to be about Rose. Until this business with her, I had never minded when Aldrich called for me. Usually I thrilled for it often meant he was desperate with yearning. But now I couldn't help but wonder what his true motivations were. Straightening my bag, I gave the secretary my reply. Very well, lead the way. As I followed the man to the Eastern Palace, my thoughts began to swirl. Rose was now his concubine, that much was clear. But I had no reason to be friendly with her, no obligation. I was fully within my rights to turn her away. Shouldn't that be the end of it? Was Aldrich going to criticize me for not calling her my sister? No. No matter how infatuated he was with her, he couldn't expect that of me. He knew better. Aldrich had seen his father's concubines as he grew up. He saw how his mother had treated them, and therefore he understood the unspoken rules between queens and women like them. Before I knew it, I found myself being admitted into Aldrich's darkened library.
I've been waiting for an hour. Where were you?
Am I required to account for my whereabouts at all times now?
It was a simple question that demands a simple answer.
His tone was brusque. He didn't sound like himself. I quickly realized I had better be truthful. I was in the gardens with my ladies-in-waiting. I needed some air. Satisfied that I was obedient once more, Aldrich went about silently preparing a draught of wine for us. He was buying time, and sure enough, once he handed me the goblet, he launched into the real topic he wanted to discuss.
I'm planning on giving Miss Rose a lady-in-waiting. Maybe two.
So I've heard. I responded, keeping my voice steady. Your secretaries are turning themselves inside out in their search.
And yet, after all their efforts, no noblewoman has come forward. Not a single one.
Is that so? I asked as plainly as I could.
It is my suspicion that they are not coming forward because of you.
Me? Why? Aldrich carefully, deliberately placed his goblet upon a nearby mahogany shelf, but then, with a ferocity I hadn't expected, he whipped around to face me.
Because you, the Queen, are the caretaker of the palace, and when you do not come forward, when you shun Rose from your presence, the rest of the aristocracy believes they cannot associate with her either. So, wife, I charge you with this task. You must find a lady-in-waiting for Rose.
Aldrich, that would be tantamount to me serving her.
Yes. Yes, it would.
I nearly dropped my goblet of wine to the floor. Nonsense! Why would the Queen provide a lady-in-waiting for the concubine? My own ladies were irate. Amidst their shouting and chattering, Countess Eliza, who suffered from a weak heart, sank down to the nearest settee, while Viscountess Verdi fanned her and spoke in a soothing voice. Then she turned to me. Thank goodness Laura is not here. She is a fiery young woman, and would surely say or do something she would regret. With a renewed wave of chatter, my ladies heartily agreed. I sat immobile and silent, overwhelmed by my own anger. Slowly, my lady's fury turned to nerves. What are you going to do, Your Majesty? Are you really going to find her a lady-in-waiting? I sighed. I wish I could say no, but the king gave me a direct order, and as much as I dislike it, loathe it, the hierarchy still puts his wishes above mine. The ladies muttered and tisked quietly to themselves. I couldn't help but be grateful for their loyalty. However, that didn't change my predicament. A lady-in-waiting was usually of similar or lower rank than the noblewoman she was serving, but Rose was not a noble at all. My mind spun. Maybe, just maybe in this case, it might be appropriate to find a lady amongst the fallen or lower nobles. However, even that posed a problem, as many of them lived too far from the palace to find on such short notice. I considered it for another moment, before turning to Viscountess Verdi. Viscountess, please send an invitation for tea in the gardens to all of the young ladies and women in the capital. Anyone of even remotely noble birth should be contacted. I'll need to settle this matter as soon as possible so that the king doesn't think I'm sabotaging his lover any further. We'll just have to hope that someone nearby accepts the position. Viscountess Verdi nodded and immediately left my chambers to execute my wishes. Silently, I said a little prayer to myself in the hopes that this would all be over quickly, else I was sure things would soon turn from bad to worse. A tea party in the gardens, and every noblewoman in the capital has been invited.
Rose was astonished. Cheryl, her maid, bobbed her head in acknowledgement, then continued her report.
Yes, miss. A real royal tea party, to be hosted at the palace by the Queen herself. I've seen the preparations with my own eyes. You can't even imagine how grand it is. All the ladies in the capital have been gathering in the grounds for hours. Some, I think, even took their place before the palace gate last night. I'm told the invitations were sent out yesterday. Yesterday? But I never received one. What about me?
Cheryl hung her head, no longer able to look Rose in the eye.
'Tis a shame, miss. It's truly a blight on your name, because even if you're not a noble, Miss Rose, you're still a person of great importance to His Majesty the King.
Rose slumped in her seat, quickly turning away from her maid so that she wouldn't see the tears in her eyes.
I wondered what all the commotion was about, Rose muttered, looking out at the palace grounds. I could hear the bustling and hammering as I tried to sleep last night.
Kaya rushed to Rose's side, kneeling and taking her mistress's hand.
The Queen is being unfair to you, Miss Rose. First, she declined a banquet in your honour, claiming it conflicted with the winter solstice. It is a sorry excuse and anyone could see it. But now, leaving you out of a party. It's a horror, Miss Rose, plain as the nose on my face. You are the official concubine, after all.
Tea parties and banquets hosted by the palace differed in size and grandeur, but to Cheryl, Kaya, and Rose, who didn't know much about royal affairs, this party seemed like it was fit for the gods.
It isn't fair that I wasn't invited.
With the indignation and embarrassment of being left out landing squarely on her shoulders, Rose pushed herself up from her seat and threw herself onto the silk sheets of the bed, crying into the nearest pillow. Cheryl and Kaya ran to their mistress's side, where the latter pulled a handkerchief from the fold in the pocket of her skirt and tucked it into Rose's hand.
The Queen is just jealous because the King loves you. It's nothing but jealousy, miss, all jealousy.
But Rose continued to sob into the pillow, inconsolable. That was when an idea dawned upon Kaya.
Miss Rose, why don't you dress up and go to the party?
Rose's sobs hitched, and slowly she turned her tear-stained face to Kaya.
But I wasn't invited. They'll cause a scene. Yes, miss. Yes, you will.
Kaya's grin was devilish.
The gardens, resplendent with their bright array of winter blooms, looked even more inviting than usual, with the day's mouth-watering spread of tiny finger sandwiches, scones and jams, puddings and jellies, all sitting upon silver trays and the finest china plates. At first, the guests were surprised to find a buffet at a tea party, but soon enough, with full bellies and heads buzzing from champagne and gossip, they were happily laughing and talking amongst themselves. Although only noblewomen were invited, the number of guests exceeded my expectations. Apparently, some women of higher and lower rank had pushed in. Nonetheless, I was pleased. I was certain the extra ladies in attendance would surely make my assigned search more likely to be successful. And once this uncomfortable task was over with, I could go back to pretending that Rose didn't exist, and I could stop picturing her and Aldrich together. Before long, one of my ladies-in-waiting whispered in my ear that it was time, and so I stood and clinked my silver spoon upon the edge of the champagne flute I held in my gloved hand. It took but a moment for the laughing and chatter to subside, and for every face to turn upon me. My dearest subjects, thank you for attending to me today. I am grateful for your response to my summons, and I hope that the food, drink, and warmth of the palace is making for a pleasurable winter's day. However, I must admit that I had a certain motive for inviting you all here. His Majesty the King has asked me to provide a lady-in-waiting for his first official concubine, Miss Rose. The words stuck in my throat, and for a moment I could no longer speak. Then, with a forced smile, I raised my head and continued. This is all to be done in a rush. Indeed, this task must be completed before the forthcoming winter solstice, and as such, I cannot search farther than the borders of this capital for such a woman. I ask you, Is there anyone amongst you, or anyone of your acquaintance, who would want to be a companion for Miss Rose, to teach her and guide her in the ways of the aristocracy?" I held my breath in anticipation, hoping that my worry didn't show on my face. I hadn't directly asked them, "Who among you wants to be Miss Rose's lady-in-waiting?" I couldn't, for although their standards were lower than the nobles of the palace, those who lived in the capital city still held a certain amount of pride in their position. They certainly thought of themselves higher in rank than the nobles of the provinces. Still, I doubted there would be one among them who would want to take a position below a commoner. So I had chosen my words carefully. I was dismayed to find that I was met by silence, broken only by the nervous shuffling of their silk slippers upon the closely clipped grass. As the gravity of my request sank in, the women and young ladies exchanged glances, subtly shaking their heads at one another. Still, I waited. Finally, one amongst them stepped forward. "Yes, Your Majesty, my name is Lady Alice. I am a friend of Lady Laura's." I nodded in recognition of her title and friendship, then waited for her to continue. "Your Majesty, if you would, I want to help you, but please don't tell the king what I'm about to say." "All right," I said somewhat reluctantly. "You have my word. You may speak freely, Lady Alice." "It's rumoured that this Miss Rose is a runaway slave. If she was just a commoner, then perhaps someone may have wanted to serve her. But if the rumours are true, Your Highness, everyone is reluctant." The ladies in attendance nodded, muttering in agreement of this shared rumour and consequences, while their delicate cups clinked in their gloved hands. Lady Alice cleared her throat and continued. "Whoever became a lady-in-waiting for a runaway slave would not be able to show their face in decent society, Your Majesty, nor would their family. Even if there was someone suitable for the position, it would be understandable if they didn't want to be caught up in the scandal regardless. In truth, Your Highness, to serve as Miss Rose's lady-in-waiting wouldn't be an honour, but a punishment." I was astonished at the speed with which the gossip had spread throughout society. How had it gone beyond the palace walls? However, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Each and every one of the noble women before me stood with hesitation in their eyes, and they were all waiting for me to either confirm or deny the rumour. In truth, I didn't know what was hearsay and what was fact. "She's nothing but a commoner," I announced to the women, nearing Aldrich's answer. "The king found her while he was out hunting. She was injured, her leg caught in a trap meant for some fell beast. Out of kindness, the king brought her back to the palace to be healed and cared for. Things, obviously, progressed between them after that." I felt the heat in my cheeks rise, and desperately hoped that the guests didn't notice. Looking out at them, I saw the ladies in attendance nodding politely, but I knew they didn't believe a word I said, because despite their overt acceptance of my explanation, not a single one of them stepped forward. I opened my mouth to plead with them once more, fearing what Aldrich would think of me if I failed at this latest task for his lover, but I never got the chance. A chorus of surprised yelps and hiccups of consternation erupted from the farthest reaches of the crowd, interrupting me. The ladies who stood at the very back, clearly upset by something, jumped and skipped out of the way. Had a beast emerged from the woods? I was worried, and I craned my neck to see. Whatever it was drew closer to me, splitting the crowd down the middle, leaving vexed and chattering ladies in its wake. I stood my ground, waiting for this threat to make itself known to me. With one final push past Lady Alice, the source of the upset revealed itself. Rose. She wore a gown of pale lilac and silver, and had clumsily adorned herself with every jewel Aldrich had gifted her, making her look like a child playing dress-up instead of a stately lady. But it was her face that drew my attention, red and tear-stained, with twigs caught in her hair from where she'd been hiding in the shrubbery. She had clearly overheard all that had transpired moments before. Coming to a stop before me, Rose glared with cold, dark eyes, then turned to the assembled noblewomen, You know nothing of me, she spat, slurring her words. That was when I noticed the empty champagne flute in her hands. And I wouldn't allow any of you to serve me, even if you begged. I have the king's love and attention, and that is more than any of you ever will have, even her. With a shaking finger, Rose pointed directly at me. I could feel the rage barely checked within her, the desperation, and it sent a chill down my spine. She opened her mouth to say more, but words failed her. Choked by her emotions, and within a hair's breadth of being overwhelmed by them, Rose instead gathered up her skirts, held her chin high, and marched out of the gardens. Anxious about my upcoming dinner with my husband, I cursed the fates that it had chanced to fall on the same night as my fruitless party. If the king had been displeased before, I could only imagine his ire when he heard about me being unable to find a lady-in-waiting for Rose after all this time. And yet, I held my head high as I entered the dining room, for I knew of the exhaustive efforts I had put in, and I vowed not to act the subordinate. Just as always, 2 footmen pulled the great double doors to the dining room open, admitting me into the cavernous space. To my surprise, there was no food on the table, but even so, Aldrich sat in his customary seat, waiting for me. Taking a deep and steadying breath, I proceeded into the dining hall, the heels of my slippers clacking noisily upon the marble floor, as I approached my seat opposite to my husband. And still, even as I settled in, he said nothing to me. I couldn't say how long we sat in tense silence, nor what finally prompted him to raise his eyes to meet mine and speak.
One of my knights told me that you summoned all the noble women of the capital to the Western Palace today, and that you feasted on cakes and gossip for hours. It sounded like such an excess in gluttony that I was sure you would be full, so I sent the order to cancel our own dinner.
His tone was colder than I had ever heard come from his lips. I tried to compose myself, despite the thin sheen of sweat breaking upon my brow. How could I answer him? I couldn't deny the tea, despite his distortion of the facts. My lord, I had no intention of disrespecting our dinner together, and while the tea may have appeared abundant, I only planned it that way so that the ladies of the capital would have no excuse to decline my invitation. I wanted to ensure the greatest possible audience to ask. But the king interrupted me before I could finish.
I will feast with Rose instead.
Before giving me a chance to speak, Aldrich pushed himself out of his chair and began striding for the door. Aldrich, I am not finished. My shout echoed across the chamber, bringing the king's exit to a halt. Slowly, he turned back around to face me, the muscles in his jaw flickering. He had always been an imposing man, but now his presence seemed to fill the room. I cleared my throat before speaking. I called on all the women and young ladies of the capital, not merely to feast, but to ask them directly to serve your concubine. However, I regret to inform you that not one offered to serve. I knew this answer would upset Aldrich, and I could see his frown deepening even from across the space between us. When he spoke again, his voice was a quiet threat.
Is that all you have to report?
What else is there?
I cannot fathom a single possible reason that each and every one of the women and young ladies of the capital could have to deny such service to Miss Rose.
I hesitated before answering, knowing that the circling rumours would upset him even further. Aldrich took the opportunity to make his own assumptions.
Is the issue money?
No. Silently, I scrambled for an answer that would appease him. I couldn't tell Aldrich the truth, for if I spoke of the rumour that Rose was a runaway slave, I would be betraying the trust of each and every one of the noble women in attendance, and most especially Lady Alice, who had asked me to keep it secret. I had vowed that her word was safe with me. Finally, I spoke. I cannot say for certain. It's only an assumption. But I got the impression that the reason no one was willing to come forward was the festive season. With the winter solstice approaching, everyone is too busy, and they feared they wouldn't do the role justice. A lackluster lady-in-waiting wouldn't be fair to Miss Rose, or to you. I placed a certain emphasis on the last 3 words, hoping that they'd sting. Still half turned towards the door, Aldrich tensed at my statement, his cold eyes studying my face.
Did you say anything in your invitation to the noblewomen that may have swayed their opinion of Miss Rose? For it certainly seems strange to me that each and every one of them would refuse such an honourable post, no matter the time of year or how full they claim their calendars to be.
Of course not. How could I? I don't know a thing about your concubine, and even if I did, do you really think I would put it in an invitation to tea? Come to the palace, see the tramp that my husband has taken for a lover. Faster than I thought possible, Aldrich's anger crested, and he rushed me, pinning me to the wall. But the moment he realized he had me trapped, he softened, though his breath still came heavy against my skin. It had been a long time since we were this close, and this alone. I struggled to find the balance between my anger at him and my passion. I wanted to reach out and touch his chest, to feel the heat of him under my palm, but I resisted. However, when I spoke, my words sounded in a throaty whisper that I did not intend. Feel free to check the invitations for yourself, Your Majesty, and you'll find they simply state the time and place for sandwiches and cakes. Aldrich wasn't listening. His eyes flickered to my lips, but instead of closing the gap between us, he pushed himself away from me and began pacing the room.
A rumour doesn't need to be put into writing.
His voice thick with a wildfire of barely contained emotion.
And you don't need to know anything about Rose in order to spread vicious hearsay. People, even queens, love to speak with certainty, despite not knowing a thing.
I needed a moment to clear my head, but Aldrich was waiting for my response. That may be true, my lord, but by the same token, there are also some husbands who doubt their wives, despite their vows of loyalty, and without a shred of evidence to go on, other than their bruised egos. Anger flashed across Aldrich's face at the implied meaning of my words, but neither of us moved, nor spoke any further. We were both frozen in silence between us, rife with unspoken accusations, each testing the other to see who would back down first. There was no way it would be me.
If that's your story, Queen, then I won't question it.
Very good, my lord. I knew it was folly to argue with the king, even in the tiniest matter. But even so, without so much as a bow of my head, I pushed past him and marched out of the dining hall.
The king sat in the throne room, facing the usual horde of secretaries and servants, each desperate for Aldrich's signature on their never-ending lists of menial tasks. At least that was how Aldrich felt about them. As he waved off the last of the requests, he vaguely wondered how the hall was going to be decorated for the upcoming winter solstice feast. The throne room not only served as the palace's main place of business, but held all of the grandest banquets within its walls. As the last secretary closed his leather folio and stepped off the dais, Aldrich assessed the scene before him. With today's tasks done, the assembled servants and secretaries chattered amongst themselves while gathering their parchments together. Sighing heavily, the king realized that this was the most, and probably only, opportune time to make his announcement. He cleared his throat, wishing he didn't have to decree such an order, but Bronwyn had forced his hand. The servants and secretaries turned to him, surprised, and when silence reigned once more, Aldrich spoke. "I need a lady-in-waiting to serve Miss Rose. You all must have female relatives. I want each of you to recommend 2 possible candidates to me, from which I will choose the most suitable." Aldrich surveyed the room as a hush of whispers broke out amongst his secretaries. He knew they wondered why Rose didn't have ladies-in-waiting of her own, and they likely wondered why none of Bronwyn's guests had volunteered either. Their suspicions about her lineage would be growing, though it wasn't anything new for a concubine, any concubine, to be wondered at. Hers was an odd position, and not one for the faint of heart. She would be the subject of much attention and envy, as well as a great deal of criticism and contempt. However, that also meant that it was best to quash rumours quickly. Aldrich didn't believe a word of Bronwyn's explanation as to why none of the noble women volunteered, and so he came to his own conclusion. Rose's publicly announced status as a commoner must have hurt the nobles' pride. No one wanted to serve someone beneath them. Historically, this little inconvenience had been dealt with by marrying the concubine in question to another aristocrat, purely to forge a noble identity before anyone knew about the woman's existence. But it was too late for that now, and there was already too much talk about Rose to conceal her background. For as long as those rumours endured, Aldrich knew that the nobles would never accept her into their society. It was time to start cleaning up this mess, before the hearsay got any more vicious, or closer to the truth. The king raised his voice above the hubbub in the room once more. "She needs to have a peer, someone her own age whom she can talk to freely. I expect you to present your candidates before the next full moon." Recognizing the precariousness of their situation, the secretaries and servants bowed more deeply than was strictly necessary, and respectfully retreated from the room. Baron Lant sat in the parlour of his estate home, trembling before his wife. Both she and her children were red-faced with anger.
How could you ask this of me? I would be ruined. You would be ruined. This is a runaway slave that we're talking about.
The Baron shook his head.
No, she's not a runaway slave. She's a commoner. That's an important distinction, my dear.
Even if she's not a runaway slave, the rumor will persist now that the seed has been planted in everyone's minds. The entire kingdom will wonder, and gossip, and question her lineage. Whether or not it's true is irrelevant now.
Baron Lant dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. He believed that Rose was a charming and lovely woman, and that one day she would indeed be accepted into society once they saw her qualities, even though, strictly speaking, that was against all convention and precedent. However, he also knew that the future was uncertain, and what was certain was that right now, no one amongst the nobles favoured her. The Baroness was right. And yet the king had demanded 2 candidates per family. He pressed on.
Oh, what about your sister's daughter, your niece, Alice?
Baroness Lant laughed.
Oh, I see. Only my side of the family is low enough to serve this commoner. I noticed that you aren't suggesting any one of your nieces.
The Baron placed a hand on his chest to steady his palpitating heart. The same argument was being played out in every corner of the kingdom. Every baron and baroness, every duke and duchess, every marquise and marchioness sat in salons and libraries and in gardens, red-faced from arguing with each other. All because of Rose. Despite this, in the end, the king's orders were followed, and each grand house provided 2 potential candidates for Aldrich's approval. Baron Lant and Count Perdue won the unlucky lottery, with their niece and daughter selected as the concubine's official ladies-in-waiting.
News soon reached me about the new ladies-in-waiting, and while I was grateful that I'd had nothing to do with it, I was surprised that Aldrich had taken the drastic step of ordering such volunteerism from amongst his trusted advisers. I wasn't entirely surprised that Baron Lant had provided one of the unlucky ladies. His loyalty to the king knew no bounds. But I was surprised to hear about Count Perdue's daughter. Have the Perdues fallen on hard times? Why would you say that, your majesty? I lowered my voice so none of the footmen could overhear. Because I've always known the Perdews to be a strong and proud household. I can't imagine what would have induced them to give their daughter. Her name is Helen, isn't it? What would have possessed them to condemn Helen to such employment? Perhaps she's there for her father's sake, Laura ventured. Aren't daughters the usual pawns in these political games? There was a knowing look in Laura's eye that made me uncomfortable, but it seemed dangerous to pursue any further at this moment. And she wasn't wrong about daughters in politics. Yes, I suppose so. I hadn't covered the suspicion in my voice as well as usual, and the ladies looked at me expectantly. I needed to change the subject, and so I flashed them a bright smile. Oh, enough of the palace intrigue. Let us take the air and walk the grounds. The gardeners tell me that the snowberries are nearly in bloom. Despite a few poorly concealed sideways glances, my ladies-in-waiting were well trained enough to say no more on the topic. Besides, they all knew my true aim in the garden. I was hoping for another glimpse of the mysterious bird, and a response to my note.
It's Dot. What up? What up? It's Dot. Stupid.
I wanna go to LA.
Bitch, what up? Nigga had killed your brother, he ain't get back. Nigga know what's up. Noonie ass dad, they fucked him up. We was so quick to go jump out of trucks. Yeah, phone them hit that.
The day was moody and dark, with scant silver sunlight and the threat of rain. Even so, after a few turns around the expansive gardens, all thoughts of Rose had happily left my mind. That was when I felt a flutter just above my head, powerful enough to ruffle my jet black hair. The day was moody and dark, with scant silver sunlight and the threat of rain. Even so, after a few turns around the expansive gardens, all thoughts of Rose had happily left my mind. That was when I felt a flutter just above my head, powerful enough to ruffle my jet black hair. The bird. My heart leapt at the sight more than I would ever admit to my nearby ladies. I had been certain I would never see the creature again, and the delight of having been proved wrong must have shown on my face. Astonishing. Your Majesty, the bird came directly to you once again. It could have gone to any one of us, and yet see how it hovers only around you. Nonsense, Eliza. It is pure happenstance, plain and simple. Come, all of us, we shall perform an experiment. Put out your hands, and we will see who the bird chooses. There were 6 of us in total, a colourful constellation of dresses and jewels for the mysterious bird to choose from. And yet, it took only but a moment for the feathery thing to choose me, landing directly on my arm. Viscountess Verdi giggled, but not unkindly. You see, my lady, the bird only has eyes for you. Had I not been smiling so widely, I would have thought of a comeback in jest, but I was too happy to see the midnight hawk once more. It carries another note. Carefully, I untied the ribbon-wrapped parchment secured to its leg and read the note in silence. What is it, Your Majesty? What does the note say? I blushed and paused before I spoke. It says,
Those who play with fire may be likely to get burned. But at times, isn't some pain for the sake of pleasure worth the price?
Some of my ladies giggled at the response, while others fanned themselves. Are you going to write back? What are you going to say? I thought carefully for a moment, debating the merits and pitfalls of this secretive game, but the pleasure in anticipating the next note outweighed any other consideration. I turned to Countess Eliza. Countess, do you still carry that quill and paper? She quickly searched her pockets and once again handed me the gold foil pad and quill. I took a seat on the edge of a nearby fountain and composed my reply. And do you take your pleasures upon no one in particular? For these letters remain nameless, as do I. Perhaps you are nothing but a rake looking to get his way with some unsuspecting woman. Since you burn for me, let us become acquainted. I'll begin with a simple question. What is the bird's name? Satisfied by the giggles that my response elicited from the ladies, I carefully rolled the parchment and tied the note to the bird's leg once more. As I watched the midnight hawk take wing amongst the mist, I mused on my response. I had ended my note with a question, but the person who received the letter replied to me again. I crossed my fingers that they would. It wasn't long after I returned to the palace that my reprieve from any thoughts of Rose came to an end.
Bronwyn, I must speak with you.
I looked up from my work to find Aldrich standing above me. The remaining details of the winter solstice preparations plagued me. The Minister of Finance stood on my left, and the Minister of Culture on my right, and yet Aldrich stood before me, making demands. From the look on his face, I knew exactly what he wished to discuss. I sighed. Is it urgent? I asked, hoping against hope that he wanted to discuss anything but her. Instead of replying to me, Aldrich made a small gesture with his hand at the ministers, who, instantly understanding his command, relinquished their seats and left the room. When the great oak doors clicked shut, the king turned to face me once more. This can't be about her again. Stifling his instinctive response, Aldrich instead leaned on the table between us, his fingers tented on the polished wood. He looked as though he was readying to give a speech to a war room.
It is about her, and her name is Rose.
Please, can't you solve the concubine's problems on your own? I want nothing to do with her. The comment escaped my mouth before I had the chance to think better of it, and I immediately wished I had held my tongue, for the atmosphere in the room darkened in an instant. With a heavy sigh meant to subdue his growing frustration, Aldrich pushed back from the table and held my gaze.
Are you the source of the rumour?
What rumour?
Come now, Bronwyn. We've known each other for a long time. Don't play dumb with me. You are far too intelligent for that. Did you spread the rumour that Rose is a runaway slave?
I scoffed. Not that story again. I may have scoffed, but inwardly I was surprised. This accusation was far more specific than last time. Before, he had only asked if I had said something strange. Now the muscles in his jaw flickered under the pressure of his bite, as he awaited my response. I kept silent, and in the end he spoke first.
Not only do Rose's new ladies-in-waiting treat her poorly, but they don't act as they should.
Aldrich, I have no control nor interest in how the concubine's ladies act or do not act. I don't know why you came to me with this. I have nothing to do with her. But it was clear that the king wasn't listening to me. He had begun to pace the floor, too agitated to stay still.
But why do they ignore Rose at every opportunity? Why do they compare everything she does to you? Poor Rose is trying to remain strong. She tries to hide it from me, but I can see in her eyes that something was wrong. If I hadn't seen the behavior of her ladies-in-waiting myself, I wouldn't have known it was happening.
Again, Aldrich, I cannot help you in this. I suggest you ask her ladies. At that suggestion, Aldrich finally stopped pacing.
I did ask them, and they told me they didn't want to serve a runaway slave.
There was a cold look in his eye that sent a chill down my spine. Now that he had accused me once, I knew he would blame me forever. Anger and hurt dwelled in my chest as I stood facing Aldrich and his heinous accusation. My eyes were hot with unshed tears, but I bit my tongue to hold them back. I wouldn't cry over her, not in front of him. I steadied my voice before speaking. They said they heard rumours. Not that I said them. Are you blaming me for rumours to which you don't know the source?
Bronwyn, there isn't anyone else but you who could benefit from such whispers.
Tell me, Aldrich, what could I possibly gain?
Bronwyn, don't make me say it.
If you think I'm going to spare you from the discomfort of this conversation, then you shouldn't have started it at all. The king stared at me, then ran a hand roughly through his hair. He growled his next words.
Rose is your romantic rival.
I had known that he was going to say something along those lines. However, hearing it aloud hurt more than I expected. I was sure the pain showed on my face, but that didn't stop him from continuing.
Wasn't it you who told me the story of Rose being a runaway slave? You never said a word about the source of the rumor then, but I've since realized that you could have been the source from the beginning.
Aldrich's accusation was as one-sided as it was insulting. It took all my strength to steady my breath and keep my composure. But the more I tried to keep calm, the more suspicious he seemed to become of me. It took a moment longer, but I finally managed to force my voice into its normal tone. Your concubine is no rival to me.
Bronwyn.
No, you do not get to tell me how to think or feel. You don't know what's going on inside my head. But if I must explain the inner workings of a feminine mind to you, here it is. You may be my husband, and you may have been my lover. But if you no longer choose me, then I'm not going to stand here and beg. So how can she be a threat to me if I refuse to compete? Aldrich's expression wavered. Seeing him weakening, I took the opportunity to state my intentions once and for all. The concubine is precious to you, while I, evidently, am just like everyone else. Despite that, I will do my duties. I will act as queen. I will serve my people. However, I am tiring of this topic, so let me say it again, Your Majesty, once and for all. Do not involve me with your lover. With that, I whirled around and saw myself through the door, leaving the king slack-jawed and silenced. I marched through the palace, keeping my head down, afraid that someone would see my brimming tears. I needed to be away from everyone. I needed to be alone. Rushing past the throne room, the library, and through the great hall, I raced down the sweeping limestone steps and into the western gardens. Breaking into a run, I made for my secluded nest chair, where no one ever went, not even my ladies in waiting, and buried myself inside. Hugging my knees into my chest, I stifled my sobs as best I could. The queen does not cry, or at the very least, she does not cry in front of others. I tried to convince myself that Aldrich and his concubine were small and unimportant, and therefore they could not shake me. But in my heart, there was a hole. I stayed cocooned in my chair for a long time, hidden behind vines of ivy, and eventually the sky darkened. My ladies in waiting were surely searching for me by now, and as my emotions subsided, I began to feel bad for worrying them. Slowly, I unfolded my body, stiff as a wooden doll from having sat, curled up in one position for so many hours. That was when I heard a piercing cry. Ducking back into the safety of my hideaway, I peered through the ivy to locate the source of the sound. The bird. I emerged from my nest, just as eager to see the creature again as it appeared to see me. It landed on my arm straight away, and tilting its head, it blinked its huge eyes. You came to see me. The bird seemed to bob its head in agreement. Then it indicated its leg, where I found another note. I unfurled it to find the now familiar writing, sweeping and strong.
Does the bird need a name? Well, you can give it one if you like.
I sat back and studied my feathered friend, heavy upon my arm. Of course you need a name. Everyone needs a name. The bird looked back at me, and I swore that its gaze felt more penetrating than usual. Did it know that I was feeling depressed? A name. How about bird? I looked into its bright eyes, where I could almost see the understanding there. Whether that was a foolish notion or not, the bird looked displeased at my first attempt at its new name. I hesitated for a moment, looked around, then hugged the bird close and whispered to its feathery head, "This is my secret place." The creature shifted and gave me a blank look. Giving it a pat on the back, I continued to speak anyway. You see, there's nowhere I can cry, and if I always hold it in, my heart would never feel content. Now I'm trusting you with this secret, so don't tell anyone else." The midnight hawk blinked its large eyes again, then slowly lifted a wing and brushed it against my cheek as if to comfort me. I smiled. "Right, I am the queen. Yes, no matter what happens, no matter what Aldrich says to me, I am still the queen. The concubine will always just be the concubine and nothing more. Besides, my subjects don't really expect there to be love between their king and queen, just respect and stability and leadership. It had just been a lucky twist of fate that Aldrich and I loved each other. So enough of this despair. I've spent enough time on self-pity. It's time to pick myself up." I found the bird listening to my every word. "Thank you, little one." I kissed its head in gratitude, eliciting a funny squawk. "Oh, you silly thing. It's just a little kiss. Nothing untoward." The bird gazed up at me, registering my smile, then took the note in its beak and dropped it in my lap. Did it want to reply? Luckily, I had taken to carrying my own pad of parchment and quill with me. I didn't want to be unprepared if I was lucky enough to see the creature again. Taking them out, I thought carefully about a good name. The bird's name is Majesty. When I finished the note, I looked up to see the bird staring at my writing, as if it could read the letters. "That's your name now. If you could give this to your master, I would be grateful." I tied the note to the hawk's leg, then gently hugged it again and released it into the sky. As I watched it fly, I realized that I felt better, comforted. I couldn't say why. Telling my deepest secrets to a bird made me feel better, but it did. And so I practiced my smile once more and returned to the palace.
Skimming over the rooftops of the capital, the hawk flew beyond the boundaries of the city and straight to a nearby mountain. Circling for a moment, it appeared to be checking that it hadn't been followed, and only when it was satisfied did it perch on a rocky outcrop, disturbing a flock of roosting pigeons. Then, in a flash of golden light, the bird transformed into a man. He was handsome, regal, strong in body, and seemingly quick of mind. He was also annoyed. Calling a male Majesty. At the sudden appearance of a man, the pigeons flapped and squawked, taking off in a rush. However, one black bird, another hawk, in a nearby tree seemed curious. Hopping down, that bird also erupted into a flash of light and transformed into a man. He was more than annoyed. "You went to see her again, didn't you? You were supposed to be scouting." "Don't be ridiculous. I have been scouting. For beautiful women." The tension between the two men crackled in the air. "You don't believe me?" "Of course I do, Your Highness, on my word. But please, be careful and be mindful of your actions. Remember, you are the heir to the Celestial Isles. I can't let anything happen to you." "And you know that I trust you with my life, good sir. But there's danger afoot, and drastic measures may be necessary."